He heard everything, every whisper, every plan, every single word his fiancée said while she stood over his bed thinking he was gone. Adrian Whitmore, the most feared man in the city, lay perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing slow. A machine beeped beside him, and Vanessa leaned over, fixed her lipstick in the reflection of his IV bag, and said to his stepbrother, "How much longer do we have to wait?" That sentence, those 6 words, they didn't break him. They woke him. If this story moves something in you, hit that subscribe button right now and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. 3 days before Adrian Whitmore was rushed to Mercy General Hospital with what the doctors called a severe neurological episode, he had been standing in his study alone holding a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. He wasn't drunk, he was thinking. That was always more dangerous. His right-hand man, a quiet, heavy-set man named Boone, had placed a folder on his desk without a word. Adrian had opened it slowly the way a man opens something he already suspects will change his life. Inside were photographs, bank transfers, phone records, a series of encrypted messages printed on plain white paper, decoded by someone Adrian trusted more than almost anyone alive. He had read every page twice. Then he closed the folder, finished his whiskey in one swallow, and said to Boone, "Set it up." Boone hadn't asked what it was. He already knew. In 22 years of working for this man, he had learned that when Adrian Whitmore went quiet, truly quiet, the kind of quiet that filled a room like smoke, something was about to change. Something permanent. "How long?" Boone asked. "As long as it takes," Adrian said. "I need to know the truth, not what they show me, what they do when they think I'm gone." And so the plan was set in motion. Mercy General's private wing was different from the rest of the hospital. Quieter. The floors were polished marble instead of linoleum. The nurses wore pressed uniforms and spoke in measured tones. The rooms had real windows. Adrienne's room was the largest on the floor at the end of the hall, with a single guard posted outside who rotated every 6 hours. The medical staff had been briefed, a select few paid, and trusted that Mr. Whitmore was in a medically induced coma following a sudden cerebral event. His vitals were stable. His prognosis was uncertain. That was the story. The truth was simpler and far more brutal. Adrian Whitmore was awake. He could hear every sound, feel every touch, process every word spoken within 10 feet of that bed. He simply would not open his eyes, not yet. Vanessa arrived on the first day at 11:17 in the morning. Adrian knew it was her before she even opened the door. He recognized the click of her heels, a precise, controlled rhythm that she'd perfected the way other women perfected their smiles. 4 steps in, pause, the rustle of her coat being draped over the chair by the window. "Dr. Harmon," she said, and her voice was exactly what it always was, polished, smooth, and just warm enough to be convincing. "Has there been any change?" "Nothing significant," the doctor said. Adrian heard the careful flatness in Harmon's tone and appreciated it. Harmon was one of the trusted ones. "We're monitoring continuously." "I see." A pause, then softer, and this was the part that was almost impressive in its precision. "He looks peaceful, at least." She said it the way an actress delivers a line she's rehearsed until it sounds spontaneous. Adrian lay still and thought, peaceful. "That's the word you chose." He heard her sit down, heard her cross her legs, the soft sound of fabric shifting, then silence for a few minutes. Then the quiet tap of her fingernails on her phone screen. She wasn't praying, she wasn't crying, she wasn't holding his hand, she was answering emails. The maid arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Adrian had been told about Na in the briefing Boone gave him before the plan began. She was part of the hospital's private service staff assigned to the VIP wing to assist with non-medical needs. Fresh towels, water, the small dignities that a wealthy patient's family expected without asking. She was 26 years old. She had been working at Mercy General for 14 months. Before that, she'd worked 2 jobs: a diner in the morning, a laundry service at night to send money home to her mother in a small town 3 hours south of the city. Adrian had read her file the same way he read everyone's file, looking for the angle, the weakness, the thing that could be leveraged or exploited. He hadn't found one. That in itself had struck him as unusual. When she came into the room that first afternoon, he heard something he hadn't heard all morning, the sound of someone moving without performance. No calculated rhythm, no deliberate grace, Just a person walking into a room to do a job. Ms. Whitmore, she began. I'm his fiancée, Vanessa corrected without looking up from her phone, and you can do whatever you need to do quickly. I'd appreciate the quiet. A beat of silence. Of course, Na said. I'm sorry to disturb you. She moved around the room with efficient care, changed the water in the vase by the window, adjusted the blinds so the afternoon light fell at an angle that wasn't harsh. Then she paused at the foot of the bed. Adrian felt her standing there. He has everything he needs, she asked, not to anyone in particular. Just the quiet kind of question a person asks when they're genuinely checking. He's in a coma, Vanessa said flatly. What he needs is a medical miracle, not fresh flowers. Another silence, shorter this time. I'll come back tomorrow, Na said quietly. She left without another sound. Adrian lay in the dark behind his eyelids and thought about that pause at the foot of his bed. The way she'd stood there for just a moment, not performing concern, not calculating anything, just present with him. He couldn't remember the last time someone had simply been present with him. Lucas arrived on the second day, and the temperature in the room changed the moment he walked in. Lucas Whitmore was 34 years old, technically. Adrian's stepbrother, through a marriage that had lasted 8 years and ended badly, but had left behind a legal entanglement that made Lucas difficult to simply remove from the picture. He was charming in the way that certain people are charming, not because they light up a room, but because they know exactly which shadows to stand in. He greeted Vanessa with a kiss on the cheek, then turned to look at Adrian in the bed. How is he? The same, Vanessa said. Has he responded to anything? Nothing. She paused. The doctor says it could be weeks or longer. Lucas was quiet for a moment. Then he said very carefully, we need to talk about the Delacroix contract. Not here, Vanessa said quickly. Vanessa, his voice dropped. We're running out of time. If the board doesn't hear from him by the end of the month, I said not here. A charged pause. He can't hear us, Lucas said. And Adrian, lying 3 feet away, thought, that's your first mistake. By the third day, a pattern had formed. Mornings, Vanessa arrived, sat, worked on her phone, spoke to no one. Afternoons, Lucas appeared for 30 minutes, always whispering to Vanessa near the window, just barely too far for the nurses to hear. Late afternoons, Na came. Those were the minutes Adrian found himself waiting for, which surprised him. He was not a man who waited for anything. He was a man who made things happen on his schedule in his time on his terms. Patience was a strategy for him, never a genuine state of being. But he waited for Na. She never said much. She didn't try to fill silence the way most people did, anxious words to cover the discomfort of existing near someone who couldn't respond. She moved through the room quietly, doing the small things that no one else noticed needed doing. Straightened the edge of his blanket, made sure the room temperature was right. Once she spoke softly, not to the nurses, not to herself, but to him. It must be very strange, she said, to be so still, when you're probably the kind of man who's never still. Adrian's heart moved slightly. He couldn't explain it better than that. I don't know you, Bauma, she continued, adjusting the pillow behind his head with careful hands. But I know this, nobody should be alone in a room and feel like they're invisible. So I just want you to know I see you. She finished what she was doing and left. Adrian lay there in the silence she'd left behind, and for the first time in 3 days, possibly in years, he felt something crack open in the center of his chest. He almost opened his eyes right then. He didn't, because 5 minutes later, Vanessa returned, and she wasn't alone. Lucas had come back. They must have thought the nurses had rotated out. They must have thought the room was empty of everything except the man in the bed who couldn't hear them. The lawyers need a power of attorney document signed before the end of the week, Lucas said. His voice was low, but not low enough. If we don't have legal authority over his assets by Friday. I know the deadline, Vanessa said. Then stop stalling. I'm not stalling. I'm being careful. There's a difference. A pause. Adrian heard the sound of her heels as she moved to the window. If we move too fast, it looks wrong. The board isn't stupid, Lucas. They'll ask questions. Then we have answers ready. We need more than answers. We need legitimacy. Her voice had changed. The warmth was completely gone now, scraped away, and what was underneath was something efficient and hard. He had me sign an amended will 6 months ago, but the power of attorney supersedes it if we can get it notarized before he wakes up, Lucas finished. A beat. He's not going to wake up, Vanessa said. Adrian's jaw tightened. It was involuntary, the smallest possible movement, and he stopped it instantly. But for 1/2 second, the muscle at the corner of his mouth twitched. The doctors say a lot of things. Her voice was silk over steel. I've spoken to a specialist, privately. He confirmed that after a neurological event of this severity, sustained coma typically indicates irreversible damage. Adrienne is She paused, and in that pause, he heard her choose a word the way you choose a knife for a specific purpose. Adrienne is already gone. We're just waiting for his body to understand that. Lucas was quiet. Then, you really believe that? I believe what's practical, Vanessa said. Now, about the notary. Adrian stopped listening to the words. He was listening to what was underneath them, the absence of grief, the absence of fear, the absence of any single human feeling that you might expect from a woman whose fiancé was dying 3 feet away. There was nothing there. He had suspected it. He had read the files. He had looked at the bank transfers and the phone records and the encrypted messages. But suspicion is a cold thing, and hearing it confirmed, hearing it spoken aloud in her own voice, in his own room over his own body, was something different. It was a kind of grief, actually. Not for himself, but for the man he'd been before he'd walked into that study and opened that folder. The man who had believed somewhere beneath the armor of 20 years in this life that the woman who wore his ring had chosen him. Not his empire, him. He had been wrong about that. He had been catastrophically, completely wrong. And in the cold clarity of that understanding, Adrian Whitmore made a decision. That night, long after Vanessa and Lucas had gone and the hospital floor had gone quiet, Na came back. This surprised him. Her shift was in the afternoon. There was no reason for her to be here at 9:30 at night. He heard her set something on the table, the soft sound of a container being opened. I made soup, she said quietly. I know you can't eat it, but my mother always said if someone's unwell, you bring soup, even if they don't know you brought it. A small self-conscious pause. I guess that's a strange thing to do. Bring soup to a coma patient. She sat down in the chair by the bed, the chair that Vanessa hadn't used once. I won't stay long, she said. I kept thinking about you here alone at night, and I don't know why that bothered me so much. You're a stranger. You don't even know my name. She paused. It's Na, in case you can hear me, in case any of this gets through somehow. She was quiet for a moment. My grandmother used to say that even people who seem unconscious, they feel things. They feel warmth, they feel cold, they feel when someone cares. She said the soul doesn't sleep the way the body does. Another pause, softer. I don't know if that's true, but I'd rather act like it is and be wrong than act like it isn't and be wrong about that. Adrian lay in the dark and thought about that logic. Simple, unassuming, and somehow the most honest thing anyone had said in this room in 3 days. She stayed for 20 minutes. She didn't talk the whole time. Mostly she just sat. Occasionally she straightened his blanket or checked that the water in the jug on his side table was fresh. When she left, she said, "Good night, Mr. Whitmore. I'll be back tomorrow." And then the door closed softly and Adrian was alone again. He lay in the silence, and something that had been locked in his chest for a very long time, something he had stopped believing in because he'd had no use for it, began very quietly to breathe again. The next morning, Vanessa arrived at 11:17 as always. She sat down, crossed her legs, and opened her phone. After a minute, she said to the room, not to him, just to the air, "The lawyers will be here Thursday. It'll all be over soon." And then she went back to her emails. Adrian lay still. Thursday, he thought. I have until Thursday. And beneath his closed eyelids, in the absolute silence of a man who had built an empire by knowing exactly when to strike, Adrian Whitmore smiled. Just barely, just enough. The game had changed, and only he knew it. Thursday was 4 days away. Adrian had counted it down the way a soldier counts ammunition. Not with panic, but with the cold precision of someone who knows exactly how much they have left to work with. 4 days, 96 hours. Vanessa's lawyers would arrive with papers that would strip him of everything he had built, and she would sign his empire away with the same hand that had once worn his ring like she meant it. He had until then to decide how far he wanted to let this go. The answer he already knew was further than anyone expected. He wasn't ready to open his eyes. Not yet. There were still things he needed to hear, things that would only be said in the presence of a man the world believed was already lost. The most honest conversations in his life had always happened when people thought he wasn't listening. That was something he'd understood at 15, growing up in a house where silence was a weapon and truth was something you found in the spaces between lies. So he stayed still, he stayed quiet, and he listened. What he heard on Tuesday morning cracked something open in him that he hadn't planned for. Vanessa had arrived with a woman he didn't recognize, not by sound anyway. A stranger's heels, a stranger's perfume, something sharp and expensive. They spoke in low voices near the window, and at first he thought it was one of the lawyers she'd mentioned. But then the woman said, the dosage would need to be adjusted carefully. It can't look accelerated. And Adrian's entire body went cold. Not from fear. He hadn't felt genuine fear since he was 19 years old. From the specific clarifying shock of understanding that the situation had escalated beyond what he'd tested for. You're certain it's undetectable? Vanessa asked. In someone already presenting with a neurological event, absolutely. The body chemistry aligns perfectly. A pause. But I need to know, are we talking about a timeline here? Before Thursday, Vanessa said. It needs to be before Thursday. The stranger was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then, that's aggressive. I'm paying you to be aggressive, Vanessa said. I'm not paying you to have a conscience. Adrian processed this. He processed it the way he processed every critical piece of information, by setting aside the emotional component and examining the logistics. Someone was going to come into this room with a modified dosage of something that would interact with his current medication, and in the presence of a man already documented as neurologically compromised, produce a result that would look entirely natural. He had approximately 48 hours. He adjusted his timeline accordingly. The women left. The room went quiet. And Adrian, still and unmoving beneath his blanket, sent a single signal, a barely perceptible shift of 2 fingers against the mattress edge. A motion so small it registered as nothing to any camera, to any nurse, the signal he and Boone had agreed upon before this all began. The signal that meant move faster. Boone would see it on the private feed. Boone would know. It had to be enough. Na arrived at 2:15, 17 minutes later than usual, and she was slightly out of breath when she came through the door. He heard it, that particular breathlessness of someone who'd been walking fast and was trying not to show it. Sorry, she said softly, though there was no one to apologize to except him. The elevator was out on the east wing. I had to take the stairs. She set something down, the familiar sound of her small bag on the table, and began her quiet routine. He heard her pause at the window, adjust the blinds, check the water jug. Then she stopped. He heard her breathing change. Someone moved your pillow, she said quietly to herself, or to him. It didn't matter. That's not right. She fixed it. Her hands were careful and deliberate and warm when they briefly made contact with the edge of the fabric near his shoulder. There, that's better. She sat down. Today she didn't speak right away. He could hear her sitting in that chair, the one Vanessa had never touched, just breathing, just being there. After a while, she said, my mother called me this morning. She's not doing well. A pause. Not dramatic, not asking for sympathy, just the honest statement of someone who was carrying something and had nowhere else to put it down for a minute. She keeps asking me when I'm coming home, and I keep telling her soon, but the truth is I don't know what soon means anymore. She was quiet again. I'm sorry, she said then with a small, self-aware laugh. I shouldn't be talking about my problems to you. That's not, she stopped. I don't know, I just feel like you hear me, which is probably just something I tell myself. Adrian lay still and thought, you have no idea. You have good hands, she said suddenly, and the unexpectedness of it almost made him react. I mean, I changed your bandage yesterday, the one on your right forearm, and I noticed. You have working hands, rough in the palms. Whatever you did with your life, you didn't do it sitting behind a desk the whole time. A pause. I like that. I think a person's hands tell you who they really are. He had never in his adult life been read so accurately and so simply by someone who was doing nothing more than paying attention. He almost spoke. He stopped himself. Not because he was afraid, but because the sound of his voice in that room would change. Everything would end this strange and suspended reality. And for reasons he couldn't entirely articulate, he wasn't ready to end it. Not yet. Not before he understood what it meant that this woman, This stranger made him feel something he'd spent 20 years telling himself was a liability. She left at 3:15, exactly 1 hour after she'd arrived. The room was immediately worse without her in it. He noted that fact the way he noted financial data clinically accurately and found it profoundly inconvenient. That evening, Lucas came alone. This was new. He came in quietly without the sharp-heeled announcement of Vanessa, without the performance. He pulled a chair up, not the chair by the window where Vanessa always sat, but the chair at the side of the bed close. Too close. The kind of close that felt almost like intimacy and was absolutely not. "Hey," Lucas said, just that, quiet, like a greeting. Adrian waited. "I don't know if you can hear me." Lucas's voice was different without Vanessa in the room, lower, less careful. "I don't know what the doctors actually know about any of this." He paused. "I'm going to assume you can't, because what I have to say, I wouldn't say it if I thought there was a chance." A long silence. "I didn't want it to go this far," Lucas said. "I want you to know that, whatever you think of me, and I know what you think of me, I didn't sign up for what Vanessa's planning." Another pause, and Adrian heard something he hadn't expected, the sound of a man genuinely uncomfortable with himself. "She's been driving this from the beginning. I got pulled in because she knew exactly which buttons to push, and he stopped. "I've been greedy my whole life. You know that. You've always known that about me, and she exploited it." Adrian lay still, listening. "But there's a line," Lucas said, "and she crossed it. What she talked about this morning, what she's planning to do before Thursday, I can't." His voice dropped so low that even Adrian, who was trained to catch the quietest sounds, had to focus. "I can't be part of that. I won't." A chair shifting, the sound of Lucas standing. "I don't know what to do with that," he said. "I don't know if I'm saying this because I actually have a conscience or because I'm scared. Probably both." He was quiet for a moment longer. "I'm sorry, Adrian, for all of it, for the years of it." He left. Adrian spent the next 20 minutes turning that conversation over, examining it from every angle, testing its edges for deception, the way you test ice before you step onto it. He was a man who dealt in information, and Lucas had just handed him something significant, not because he'd revealed Vanessa's plan, which Adrian already knew, but because he'd revealed something about the fault line running through the middle of it. Vanessa and Lucas were not as unified as they'd appeared. That was leverage. He filed it carefully and waited. Wednesday arrived the way bad days often do, quietly, without warning, the danger disguised in ordinary sounds. Vanessa came at 11. She was on the phone when she walked in, which was different. She usually waited until she was settled to make calls. Today she was mid-conversation and didn't bother to lower her voice. "Tell Dr. Reyes to be there by 9 tomorrow morning," she said. "Not evening, morning." A pause, listening. "I don't care about his schedule. He's being compensated generously enough to rearrange his schedule." Another pause, shorter. "Yes, tomorrow, before the lawyers arrive." She hung up. The phone clicked against the table's surface. Adrian felt the shift in timeline like a physical thing. Tomorrow morning. They'd moved it up. 24 hours earlier than he'd calculated. Boone had seen the finger signal. He was certain of that, but certain and certain enough were two different things, and right now, in the space between those two words, a very specific kind of cold was spreading through him. He was running out of time. "You know what's funny?" Vanessa said to him, to herself, to the room. Her voice had lost even the pretense of warmth. There was something almost conversational about it, the way people talk to furniture. "When I first met you, I thought you were impossible to love. And then I realized you were never meant to be loved. You were meant to be managed." A pause. "I was always very good at managing things." She sat down by the window and crossed her legs. "Dr. Reyes is very discreet," she said. "Very careful. You won't feel anything. That's more than most people get in my experience." The room was quiet. Adrian processed the threat the way he processed all threats, with precision and without panic. But beneath the precision, something was happening that he hadn't planned for and couldn't entirely control. It was anger, not the cold, strategic anger he was familiar with, the kind that sharpened into decision, but something older and rawer and far less useful. The anger of a man who had believed, despite all evidence to the contrary, that the person who shared his life had at least a gram of genuine humanity in her. She didn't. She never had. He had been a transaction to her from the beginning, a very long, very lucrative transaction, and now the transaction was almost complete. The door opened. He heard Na before he saw her, before he could see her, the particular soft weight of her footsteps. She'd come early today, an hour early. "Miss," she started. "I said I don't want to be disturbed," Vanessa said immediately, and her voice had shifted back to the polished version. "I understand, I'm sorry." A pause. "I just need 2 minutes to check the IV line. The nurse asked me to look in when I came on." Vanessa made a sound that wasn't quite permission, but wasn't a refusal either. Na moved into the room, and then she stopped. He heard her stop. He heard a very small, very sharp intake of breath, the kind you make when you notice something that doesn't add up. The kind of breath that only happens when a perceptive person walks into a room where something is wrong and can't identify what. "Is something the matter?" Vanessa asked. "No," Na said, but something in her voice was careful now, careful in a way it hadn't been before. The IV line looks, I'll need to adjust the rate." "Then do it quietly, please." Na moved to the IV stand. She made the adjustment, and in the process of leaning over, she was very close to his face for just a moment. He felt her closeness, the way you feel warmth from a lamp. And in that proximity, very quietly, barely forming words at all, she breathed, "I see it." He didn't know what she'd seen. He didn't know what in that room had triggered the perception of a young woman who had no reason, no training, and no angle. But something had. Something she couldn't name had told her that this room was wrong. She straightened up. "Everything looks fine," she said to Vanessa in the normal voice, the professional voice. "I'll be out of your way." She left. And Adrian, whose heartbeat had been completely controlled for 4 days, felt it stutter just once in something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door and a nurse came in. Not one of his trusted staff, but one of the regular floor nurses, and said apologetically that there was an issue with the medication inventory that required the room to be cleared temporarily for a standard audit. Vanessa left with poorly concealed irritation. The nurse, who was, in fact, Boone's contact placed there exactly for this purpose, closed the door and leaned down close to Adrian's ear. "Boone says tonight, everything is in place. The board has been quietly contacted. Legal is already moving. Dr. Reyes has been identified and will not be making it to this hospital tomorrow morning." A pause. "Mr. Whitmore, are you still on schedule?" Adrian opened his eyes. Just for a moment, just enough. He looked directly at the nurse, a man in his late 30s, steady professional, and in that brief second of open-eyed contact, he communicated everything that needed to be communicated. Then he closed them again. The nurse straightened up and said in a normal tone, to no one in particular, "All clear. Thank you for your patience." He left. Vanessa returned 4 minutes later, settled back into her chair, and went back to her phone. And in the bed, Adrienne lay perfectly still, heart steady, breathing measured, every sense calibrated and alert. And for the first time in 4 days, the weight of what he was carrying shifted. Not because it was lighter, but because the end of it was now a fixed point on a real horizon. He thought about Na, about the sound of her breathing, about the 2 words she'd whispered so quietly they might have been nothing at all. "I see it." He thought about what it meant that a woman with no training, no information, and no personal stakes had walked into a room and sensed, not calculated, not deduced, but sensed that something was wrong, and had acted in the only small way she could to signal that she was aware. Not for gain, not for leverage, simply because her instincts, uncorrupted by the machinery of power, had told her that a person in that bed needed to be seen. He thought about his hands, the working man's hands she'd noticed, the truth she'd read in them without knowing who he was. He thought about a bowl of soup left on a bedside table for a man who couldn't eat it, because a woman's grandmother had once told her that you brought soup anyway, because the soul didn't sleep the way the body did. He thought about all of this, and he understood something that 20 years of running an empire had never managed to teach him. Power built walls, but it was kindness that saw through them. He had built the best walls in the city. He had believed they kept him safe. What they had kept him was alone. He had one more night to lie in this bed, one more night to be the man no one was watching. And then Thursday would arrive, and the papers Vanessa had ordered would arrive with it, and so would something else entirely. Something she had not planned for, something she had not seen coming, because she had made the oldest and most arrogant mistake that powerful people make. She had looked at Adrian Whitmore and seen an empire. She had never once looked for the man. That was her mistake. And in approximately 14 hours, it was going to cost her everything. The hospital went quiet after 10. Not the kind of quiet that meant peace, the kind that meant everyone who wasn't supposed to be there had gone home, and everyone who remained was either working or waiting. The floor nurses moved in their measured rotations. The machines hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a television played at low volume in a family waiting room, and the sound of it, that faint, tinny murmur of ordinary life, continuing outside this suspended world, was the loneliest sound Adrian had heard in days. He had 14 hours. He had counted Boone's contacts, reviewed every contingency in his head with the mechanical focus of a man running chess moves on a board only he could see. Dr. Reyes had been neutralized. He didn't need the details on that, and Boone never gave unnecessary details. The legal team was in motion. The board members who mattered had been quietly reached by channels Vanessa didn't know existed because Adrian had spent 20 years building communication lines that ran beneath every structure she could see. He was prepared. What he was not prepared for was the knock at his door at 10:43 at night. It was not a nurse's knock. He knew the nurse's knocks, by now brisk, functional, 2 taps and enter. This was hesitant. A single quiet knock, and then a pause as if the person on the other side was genuinely uncertain whether to follow through. Then the door opened. "I know it's late," Na's voice, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, I couldn't leave." She closed the door softly behind her. He heard her stand just inside the room, not moving toward him, just standing as if she was figuring out whether she'd made a mistake coming back. "Something happened today," she said quietly. "When I was in here earlier. With that woman, your fiancée." A pause. "I don't know how to explain this. I work in this wing a lot. I see a lot of patients. And sometimes you walk into a room and something just feels wrong, like the air is different." She stopped herself. That probably sounds insane. It didn't sound insane. It sounded exactly right. "I'm probably overthinking it," she said, and he could hear her talking herself back from the edge of something she couldn't fully name. "It's not my place. I'm the person who brings towels and fixes pillows and goes home. That's my job." She paused again. "But I changed your IV rate today when I came in, and when I looked at the line, something about the flow wasn't right. So I fixed it, and then I left." She was quiet. "I just wanted to come back and check that you were okay," she said. "That's all. That's the only reason I'm here." Adrian lay perfectly still and made the hardest decision he'd made in 4 days. He let her believe he couldn't hear her, because if he spoke, if he opened his eyes and spoke, everything that was set in motion would need to change, and there were people depending on that motion continuing exactly as planned. 14 hours. He only needed 14 hours. But he also needed her to know, needed it with a force that surprised him, that she was right, that her instincts were right, that the thing she sensed in this room was real, and she had done something about it quietly and without drama, and it mattered. He couldn't tell her any of that, so he did the only thing he could do. He moved his hand, not dramatically, not a full gesture, just the smallest possible shift of his right hand. The working hand she'd noticed, the rough, palmed hand she'd said told the truth about a person, a shift of perhaps 2 inches along the edge of the blanket toward where she was standing. The silence in the room changed. He heard her inhale. "Did you just—" She stopped, a long pause, then very quietly, "Did you just move your hand?" He held the position. He didn't move it again. He didn't open his eyes. But he didn't pull it back either. She was very still for a moment. He could almost hear her deciding what to believe. Then he felt warmth, her hand careful and light resting over his, not gripping, not demanding anything, just present. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, I hear you." She stayed for 30 minutes. She didn't speak much. She just sat with her hand over his, and outside the window, the city continued its indifferent nighttime business. And inside this room, something happened that had no name in the language Adrienne usually operated in. When she finally stood to leave, she squeezed his hand once gently and said, "I'll be here tomorrow." She didn't know what tomorrow meant. She didn't know that by tomorrow, nothing in this room would be the same. He listened to her leave, and then he lay in the silence she left behind and stared at the inside of his eyelids and thought, "I have to end this tonight." He shifted his fingers against the mattress edge again. The signal, 3 times, faster than before. Now, move it to now. He didn't know if Boone's camera caught it. He had to trust that it did. He'd built his entire empire on knowing when to trust. This was the hardest trust he'd ever placed. At midnight, Lucas came back. Adrian heard him before the door fully opened. The particular weight of someone moving with a decision already made a different energy than the uncertain man who'd sat by his bed the night before. Lucas came in fast and went straight to the window. "I need you to listen to me," Lucas said, and there was something stripped down in his voice. The charm was gone. "I know you probably can't hear this, but if any of this gets through, then you need to know that I called the board." Adrian's breath didn't change. His face didn't change, but every nerve in his body went sharp. "I called Franklin Hess," Lucas said. 2 hours ago, told him what Vanessa is planning, the power of attorney, the timeline, the doctor." He paused. "All of it." A very long moment. "I don't know why I'm telling you," Lucas said. "Maybe because I need to say it out loud. Maybe because if something happens to you tonight, and I never said it." He stopped. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You would never forgive me. And the strange thing is that still matters to me. After everything, it still matters." He was quiet for a moment. "Hess told me Boone already reached him," Lucas said, then slower. 3 days ago." A pause, the sound of a man recalibrating. "Which means you knew, which means this whole thing." His voice changed tone, entirely sharpened, and then, almost involuntarily, he laughed. A short, real laugh shocked out of him. You set this up, didn't you?" Adrian lay still. "You've been awake this whole time," Lucas said. Not a question. Very quiet. Not a sound from the bed. "Okay," Lucas said, and his voice had shifted into something Adrian had never heard from him before, something that might, in a different context and a different life, have been called respect. "Okay, I don't know if you can hear me or if I've just lost my mind talking to a man in a coma. But on the off chance," he stopped. "I'm done with her. With all of it. I want you to know that." He left without waiting for any response. At 12:40, the door opened again. Adrian knew immediately it wasn't It wasn't Boone's contact. It wasn't anyone he'd planned for, because the footsteps were wrong, too slow, too controlled, the careful steps of someone who was doing something they knew was wrong and was compensating with deliberate calm. He heard something set down on the table near the IV stand. A bag. Small. Medical. His jaw tightened. Dr. Reyes had been neutralized. That was what Boone's contact had told him. That was the information he'd been given at midnight, and here it was 12:40, and someone was in his room with a medical bag. Not Reyes, then. Someone else. Vanessa had a backup. Of course she did. He lay perfectly still and ran the calculation in exactly 4 seconds. If he moved, now opened his eyes, spoke, he could stop whatever was about to happen, but he would blow the entire plan. The board wasn't in position until morning. The legal team wasn't in position until morning. The controlled, complete dismantling of Vanessa's scheme depended on every piece falling in the right sequence. And if he deviated now, he heard the bag being unzipped. The calculation changed. He opened his eyes. The figure standing at the IV stand was not a doctor. It was a young man, late 20s, visibly nervous, the kind of nervous that showed in the over-controlled steadiness of his hands. He was dressed in scrubs. His hands were shaking. He had a syringe out. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The young man saw the open eyes and went absolutely rigid. Then Adrian said in a voice that was calm and low and carried 20 years of authority in it, "Put it down." The young man's hand trembled. "Put it down," Adrian said again. Same tone, same exact volume. The syringe clicked against the edge of the table. The young man stepped back. "Who sent you?" Adrian asked. No answer. The young man looked like someone whose entire nervous system had just been rerouted. "I know who sent you," Adrian said. "I'm asking you as a courtesy. Last chance to be useful before this becomes something you don't recover from." A beat. She said you wouldn't wake up," the young man said, and his voice cracked on the last word in a way that told Adrian everything he needed to know. This was not a professional. This was a person who'd been paid or pressured into something they were barely capable of doing. "Her name," Adrian said. "I can't, her name." "Vanessa Cord," the young man said, and it came out of him like something he'd been holding against his ribs. She approached me 3 weeks ago. I needed money. I have debt, and she..." "Stop," Adrian said. He pressed a single button on the side of the bed, a call button that in this wing connected not to a nursing station, but to a private security line that had been active since day one. You're going to sit down in that chair, and you're not going to off until someone comes through that door. And when they come, you're going to tell them everything she told you. Every conversation, every instruction, every payment. The young man sat down. His hands were shaking visibly. The syringe, Adrian said. What's in it? A pause. Potassium chloride, modified concentration. Adrian looked at the syringe on the table. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at this young man, this frightened, indebted young man who had almost done an irreversible thing for money, and he said quietly, "You almost killed me." "I know," the young man said. He sounded like he was about to be sick. "You're lucky I'm not the kind of man I used to be," Adrian said. The door opened. Two of Boone's people came through it, not in scrubs, not in any kind of uniform, just two men with the particular stillness of professionals, and they took the young man and the bag and the syringe, and within 90 seconds, the room was clear. Adrian sat up in the bed. His muscles protested 4 days of deliberate stillness. He ignored them. He moved carefully to the side of the bed, sat on the edge, and breathed. The machines that had been monitoring his staged vitals beeped around him. The room was exactly as it had been. He reached for his phone, his real phone, the one Boone had left in the drawer beside the bed on day one, and called. Boone picked up on the first ring. "It went sideways," Adrian said. "Reyes wasn't the only one. She had a backup. It's been handled, but we're moving the timeline." "How far?" Boone said. "Now," Adrian said. "We move now. Get Hess on the phone. Get the legal team to the building. I want everything locked down before she arrives tomorrow morning." He paused. "And Boone, I want you to find something for me." "What?" "The maid," Adrian said. "Nah, she works the private wing. I need her file on my desk tonight." A brief pause on Boone's end. "The hospital worker." "Yes." "Can I ask?" "No," Adrian said. "Just get it." He hung up. He stood up from the bed. His legs were steady. He'd been careful about that, keeping his muscles engaged beneath the blanket's subtle movements that were invisible, but kept his body from losing what it needed. He crossed to the window that Vanessa had always stood at, and he looked at the city. His city. The one he'd built piece by piece through years of decisions that had made him powerful and had cost him things he was only now beginning to understand the value of. He had built walls. He had built them deliberately, carefully, with full knowledge of what they were for and what they kept out. He had told himself the walls were protection. He had believed that for 20 years. What Na had done without knowing what she was doing, without any angle or agenda, was walk through every one of those walls as if they weren't there because she hadn't been looking at the walls at all. She'd been looking at the man behind them. His phone buzzed. Boone's text, "Hess is on. Legal is moving. Board emergency session at 6 a.m. And her name is Na John, 26. No priors, no debts. Sends 60% of her paycheck to her mother every month. You want more?" Adrian typed back, "That's enough." He put the phone down and stood in the room that had held him for 4 days and understood something with the kind of clarity that only comes when you have been stripped down to nothing, no performance, no power, no armor, and had seen yourself reflected back in someone else's simple, uncalculating kindness. He had come into this room to test loyalty. He had found something he hadn't been testing for. At 5:15 in the morning, Vanessa called him. His private number, the number only people close to him knew. The phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. Then he picked up. "Adrian," her voice, shocked into something almost real. "Adrian, you, the hospital called me and said..." "I woke up," he said. A silence. "Oh my God," she said. And she was very good, genuinely. Very good at making it sound like relief. "Oh my God, Adrian, I've been so..." "Come in at 9, he said. "I'll be waiting for you." He hung up. He sat in the chair by the window. The chair she had never touched. The chair where Na had sat every afternoon and every evening for no reason, except that she thought he shouldn't be alone. He sat in it and he waited for morning, and he thought about what he was going to say to a woman who had tried to take everything from him, and he thought about what he was going to say to a woman who had given him something without knowing she was giving it. Outside, the city was beginning to wake up. The sky was changing. The machines hummed around him. Adrian Whitmore sat in the ordinary light of an early morning and felt for the first time in longer than he could remember, like a man who knew exactly who he was, not because of fear, not because of power, but because someone had seen him clearly and not looked away. That was going to matter. He was going to make sure of it. 9 o'clock was coming, and Vanessa had no idea what she was walking into. 9 o'clock came like a verdict. Adrian had been dressed and sitting in the chair by the window for 2 hours before Vanessa arrived. He'd refused the hospital gown the moment he stood up, had Boone send clothes to the room at 6 in the morning, because he was not going to have this conversation as a patient. He was going to have it as himself, dark shirt, dark jacket, the kind of stillness that didn't need a suit to communicate authority. The board emergencies session had concluded at 7:45. Franklin Hess had called him directly afterward, his voice carrying the particular flatness of a man who had just been confirmed in his worst suspicions. "Everything's locked," Hess said. "The power of attorney filing has been flagged and frozen. The amended accounts are back under your sole authority." And Adrian, the lawyer she was using, he resigned at 7 this morning. Apparently, he had a very early conversation with someone that changed his availability. "Good," Adrian said. "The young man from last night is cooperating fully," Hess continued. "He's given us everything, names, dates, amounts. Vanessa was thorough, I'll give her that. She built this over 18 months. 18 months. He had proposed to her 22 months ago. She had started planning 4 months after he put a ring on her finger." "Thank you, Franklin," Adrian said and hung up. He didn't feel the anger anymore. It had burned through in the night, clean and complete, the way fire burns through dry wood. Nothing left afterward but ash and clarity. What he felt now was colder and more useful. It was the feeling of a man who has already decided and is simply waiting for the moment to execute. He heard her heels in the corridor at 8:58, 2 minutes early. Of course. Even now, even walking into a situation she thought she controlled Vanessa was punctual. The door opened. She stepped in and stopped. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds he counted, and in those 4 seconds, he watched her face do something he had never seen it do in 2 years together. It cracked. Just for a moment. The composed, polished surface fractured along some invisible fault line, and underneath it was something raw and unguarded, something almost like genuine shock. "Adrian," she said. "Vanessa," he said. She crossed the room toward him, hands out, and he stood not to embrace her, just to be standing when she reached him, because he was not going to receive whatever was coming from a seated position. She stopped 2 feet away, her hands dropped. "The hospital called me and said you'd woken up, but I didn't." She stopped. Restarted. "When did this happen?" "Last night," he said. "Why didn't anyone call me immediately?" "I asked them not to," he said simply. A very brief pause. Something moved behind her eyes, calculation rapid and practiced, and then the warmth came back, settled over her face like a mask being repositioned. She moved toward him again, and this time she touched his arm. "I've been out of my mind with worry," she said. "You have no idea what these past 4 days have been like." He looked at her hand on his arm. Then he looked at her face. "Tell me," he said. She blinked. "What? Tell me what these past 4 days have been like for you." Something flickered, just for a second. "I've barely slept. I've been here every day. I've been speaking with the doctors, managing everything, making sure of what he asked." The question landed quietly, and she heard the edge in it, even though his voice hadn't changed. He watched her recalibrate in real time, watched the machine behind her eyes process and adjust. "Making sure you had everything you needed," she said. "That's interesting," Adrian said, "because I need you to tell me something, Vanessa. Honestly." He paused. "Who is Dr. Reyes?" The color didn't leave her face. She was too controlled for that. But something tightened around her eyes, a microscopic tension that most people would have missed. He didn't miss it. "I don't know who that is," she said. "Okay," he said. "Who is the woman you met with Tuesday morning? The one who discussed dosage with you?" A longer pause this time. "Adrian, I don't know what you think you heard." "What I think I heard," he said. "That's what you're going with. You were in a coma." "Was I?" The room went very quiet. Vanessa's composure held for approximately 5 more seconds. Then it didn't. It didn't collapse dramatically. She wasn't the kind of woman who collapsed dramatically, but it shifted. The warmth drained out. The calculation returned. And with it, something almost like relief, as if she'd been holding a performance for too long and was tired. "How long?" she asked. "The whole time," he said. She absorbed this. He watched her absorb it, watched her rebuild her strategy in real time. watched her reject option after option in the rapid processing behind her eyes. Then she sat down. Not in the chair by the window, not even now in the wreckage of everything could she bring herself to sit in that chair. She sat on the edge of the bed. "Then you know everything," she said. "I know enough," he said. "And you're going to what? Have me arrested." "I'm going to give you a choice," he said. "Because despite everything, I'm not the man I used to be. And the man I'm becoming doesn't need to destroy people to feel powerful." She looked at him, then really looked at him, and he saw the first genuine expression he had ever seen on her face. Not warmth, not calculation, just a kind of hollow recognition. "You've changed," she said. "I have," he agreed. 4 days in a bed did that. 4 days listening to people who didn't know I was listening," he said. "It has a way of clarifying things." She was quiet for a moment. Then, almost against her will, "What's the choice?" "You walk away," he said, "today. You sign the relinquishment of all claims, the ones your lawyer was going to file before he resigned this morning, and you leave. The company, the ring, this city if you're smart." He paused. "In exchange, I don't hand everything I have to the DA's office, including the testimony of a very frightened young man who came into this room last night with a syringe." She flinched. It was small, but it was real. "The alternative," he continued, "is that I make a phone call right now, and you spend the next several years explaining yourself to people who are not known for their patience." The silence stretched. He let it stretch. He had learned patience in this bed, real patience, not the strategic kind, and he wasn't going to rush this moment. "You were never going to marry me," she said finally. Not an accusation, more like a realization she was arriving at out loud. "I was," he said. "And when I proposed, I meant it." He paused. "I stopped meaning it when I opened a folder 4 days before I came to this hospital. But before that, yes, I meant it." Something passed over her face. It might have been regret. It might have been something smaller and more self-serving. With Vanessa, he realized he could no longer tell the difference. Maybe there wasn't one. "Fine," she said. She stood up, straightened her jacket. "I'll sign whatever you need me to sign." "Boone will be in contact within the hour," Adrienne said. She moved toward the door. Then she stopped without turning around. "For what it's worth," she said, "the first year was real. I want you to know that. The first year before the money got that big and the empire got that complicated and She stopped. "The first year was real." He looked at her back. "I believe you," he said. "That's what makes it so sad." She left. The door closed. Adrienne stood in the sudden silence of the room and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He'd prepared for every version of this conversation, the defiant version, the tearful version, the threatening version. He hadn't prepared for that last moment, the strange, stripped honesty of it. The first year was real. He believed her, and it changed nothing, and he let it change nothing, and he stood in the room and gave himself exactly 60 seconds to feel the weight of 2 years of his life being wrapped up in 4 minutes of conversation. Then 60 seconds were up, and he picked up his phone. Lucas was waiting in the corridor. He knew because Boone had told him, and because Lucas had texted at 8:15, "I'll be in the hall when you're done," not asking to come in, "just wanted you to know I'm here." Adrienne walked to the door and opened it. Lucas was leaning against the wall. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. He looked frankly terrible, 2 days of stable, dark circles, the particular dishevelment of someone who'd been sitting with a conscience they didn't entirely know how to use. He straightened when he saw Adrienne standing in the doorway. "You're standing," Lucas said. "I've been standing for 3 hours," Adrienne said. Lucas looked at him for a long moment. Then, "You heard me last night, when I came in." "Yes." "All of it." "Yes." Lucas ran a hand over his face. "And why? And you called Hess," Adrienne said. "Who told me you called Hess?" "Boone had already reached him, but you didn't know that. You made the call anyway." He paused. "That matters." Lucas looked like he was unsure whether to be relieved or more nervous. "Does it matter enough?" Adrienne studied his stepbrother. This man he had kept at arm's length for 15 years. This man he'd cataloged as greedy and untrustworthy and not worth the risk of closeness. He wasn't wrong about the greedy part. He wasn't wrong about the untrustworthy history. But he had also spent the last 2 nights watching Lucas do something that most people in his world didn't do. He had watched Lucas choose in real time between self-interest and something harder, and more inconvenient. "Come in," Adrian said. Lucas came in. They sat Adrian in the chair by the window, Lucas in the chair at the side of the bed where he had sat the night he'd spoken to a man he thought couldn't hear him and told the truth anyway. "You built this whole thing," Lucas said. "The Coma, the whole setup, to see who was loyal." "Yes. And what did you find out?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "I found out that loyalty isn't really what I should have been testing for," he said. "I was testing for the wrong thing. Loyalty out of fear isn't loyalty, it's just delayed betrayal." He paused. "I found something more useful." "What?" "I found out who showed up when there was nothing to gain," Adrian said. Lucas absorbed this. "The maid," he said quietly. Adrian didn't answer, but he didn't deny it. "Adrian," Lucas leaned forward. "I owe you things I can't repay. I know that. I'm not here to negotiate terms or ask for anything. He stopped. "I need to say it out loud. I'm sorry for every year of it. The resentment, the scheming, He stopped again. "I turned into someone I don't respect, and it took watching you almost get killed by someone I helped position to understand how far gone I was." A long silence. "You didn't help position her to kill me," Adrian said. "You helped position her to control the business. What she escalated to, that was hers." "I opened the door," Lucas said. "She walked through it, but I opened it." Adrian looked at his stepbrother, this man who was underneath all the years of bad choices and opportunism, still the 15-year-old kid who had shown up in his father's house with a chip on his shoulder and a terror of being dismissed that he'd never entirely shed. "We'll figure out the rest," Adrian said. "Not today, but we will." Lucas nodded. Something in his shoulders released. Just slightly. Just enough. He stood to leave. Then he paused, the same gesture Vanessa had made, stopping at the door, but when he turned around, what was on his face was completely different from anything she'd shown. "She was here every day," Lucas said. "The maid, nah, I saw her in the corridor a few times. She always looked worried when she came out of your room." He paused. "Not perform worried, just actually worried, like she was carrying something home with her." Adrian didn't say anything. "I just thought you should know that," Lucas said, "in case it matters." He left. Adrian sat alone for the first time in 4 days in a room that felt different now that he was the only one in it, not empty in the way it had been when he was lying in that bed, but quiet in a different way. A lighter way. He picked up his phone and called Boone. "Is she here?" he asked. "She came on shift 20 minutes ago," Boone said. "East Quarter. She doesn't know you're awake. The floor staff was told not to say anything yet." "Give me 10 minutes, Adrian said. "Then send her in." "Just send her in," Boone asked. There was something almost human in his voice, a curiosity he was too professional to express fully. "Just send her in," Adrian said. He put the phone down. In those 10 minutes, he did something he almost never did. He sat without planning, without running calculations or chess moves or contingencies. He just sat and he thought about a bowl of soup on a bedside table, a hand resting over his in the dark. 2 words breathed so quietly they were almost nothing. "I see it." The way she'd talked about her mother, the way she'd talked about her grandmother's belief that the soul doesn't sleep, the way she'd said his name, not Whitmore, not Sir, just Mr. Whitmore, with the simple respect of someone who hadn't been told to be afraid of him, and so wasn't. He thought about what it meant that the most honest relationship he'd had in years was with a woman who didn't know who he was, who had sat with him and spoken to him and touched his hand because her instincts told her it was right, not because she knew his name, not because she knew his empire, not because there was anything in it for her at all. He thought about his hands, the rough palms, the working hands she'd noticed. You didn't do this sitting behind a desk the whole time. She'd been right. He had started with nothing. He had built everything with those hands, literally physically, before the empire became what it became. And somewhere in the building of it, he had forgotten what it felt like to be seen by someone who wasn't trying to use what they saw. The door opened. He heard her come in, the familiar, unhurried weight of her footsteps, and then stop. A silence so complete he could hear her breathing change. "Oh," she said, "just that," a small, unguarded sound. He looked at her. She was standing in the doorway in her work uniform, a fresh set of towels over one arm, and she was staring at him with an expression that was so purely surprised it was almost funny. Eyes wide, The towel slightly off balance, her whole posture having the quality of someone who has just walked through a door they thought led one place and found themselves somewhere completely different. "Hello," he said. She stopped. "You're awake." "I am," he said. "You're sitting in a chair." "I've been sitting in this chair for several hours," he said. I... She closed her mouth, opened it again. "I don't..." She looked down at the towels in her arms as if she'd forgotten they were there. "I brought fresh towels." She looked up at him. "That's not... I don't know why I said that." "Come in," he said, "please." She came in. She set the towels on the table, the already automatic professional gesture of someone who defaults to purpose when they're uncertain, and then stood in the middle of the room and looked at him with an honesty that no amount of training or calculation could have produced. "Are you all right?" she asked. And the question, that simple, direct, uncomplicated question, landed somewhere in the center of his chest with a weight that Vanessa's entire 2-year performance of concern had never managed to produce. "I'm better than I've been in a long time," he said. "Sit down, nah." She blinked. "You know my name." "You told me," he said. The moment stretched. He watched her face as she processed what that meant, watched the understanding arrive and settle. She sat down slowly in the chair by his window. "You heard me," she said, "when I talked to you." Every word he said, every visit, every night. She was very still. Then the soup. "The soup," he confirmed. Something moved across her face, not embarrassment exactly, but a kind of vulnerability that she was letting show anyway because there was no point now in hiding it. "I must have seemed, I talked about my mother and my grandmother, and you seemed like the most honest person who'd been in this room," Adrienne said. She looked at him. "I don't understand what's happening," she said plainly. "I know," he said. "I'm going to explain it. And then I'm going to ask you something, and you can say no, that's important for you to understand before I ask. You can say no and nothing changes for you. Your job is secure. Your life is yours. I'm not asking you because I have power over you. I'm asking because..." He stopped, found the words. "Because I've had 4 days of silence in which to understand the difference between the people in my life who are there because of what I control and the people who are there because of who I am." And that list turned out to be very short. She was watching him carefully, not calculating, just present, just listening. "You're on it," he said. The room was quiet for a moment. "You don't know me," she said softly. "I know you better than you think," he said. "I know you work a double rotation when the East Wing is understaffed. I know you send 60% of your paycheck home every month. I know your grandmother told you that the soul doesn't sleep, and you chose to believe her because acting on love and being wrong is better than not acting and being wrong about that." He paused. "I know you came back at 10:43 at night because you were worried about a stranger in a hospital room, and you brought soup and you held his hand in the dark." She looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were bright. "What are you going to ask me?" she said. He looked at this woman, this 26-year-old woman with working shift hands and a grandmother's wisdom and a capacity for simple, unperformed human decency that had walked through 4 days of his life and changed them completely. And he understood that what came next wasn't a transaction and wasn't a calculation and wasn't anything he could manage or control. It was just the truth. "Not yet," he said. "I'll ask you when the time is right, when you know the whole story and you've decided whether knowing it changes anything for you. He met her eyes. "But I want you to know that I'm going to ask, so you're not surprised when I do." She held his gaze. Then she nodded once steady, the nod of someone who is genuinely unafraid of what's coming. "All right, Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly. "Adrienne," he said, a beat. "All right," she said, "Adrienne." Outside, the city moved through its ordinary Thursday. The board was in session. Boone was managing 3 simultaneous operations. Vanessa was somewhere signing papers that ended everything she'd built toward 18 months of her life. Lucas was in a corridor somewhere figuring out who he was going to be now. And in this room that had held 4 days of stillness and silence, in the most clarifying experience of his life, Adrienne Whitmore sat across from the woman who had seen him when he was nothing but a body in a bed and felt the specific, unfamiliar weight of someone who has reached the end of one life and can see for the first time the clear outline of another. He wasn't afraid of it. That was the most surprising thing. He had built an empire on the management of fear. Other people's fear, his own fear, buried so deep he'd stopped believing it was there. And now sitting in this ordinary chair, in this ordinary room, talking to a woman who had brought him soup he couldn't eat because her grandmother told her to, he felt something he didn't have a word for in the language he'd been using his whole adult life. He felt safe. Not because the threats were gone, they were never fully gone in his world. Not because he was powerful. He had always been powerful, and it had never produced this feeling. But because across from him was a person who had no agenda and no angle and no interest in what he controlled, and she was looking at him like a human being, like a man, just a man, one who deserved to be seen. That was everything. That was more than everything. He was going to ask her. He already knew it. He'd known it since the dark of Tuesday night when she'd rested her hand over his and said, "Okay, I hear you," to a man she thought couldn't respond. But first he was going to give her the time to decide for herself. Because the one thing he had learned, truly learned in 4 days, that had cost him a fiancé and a plan, and nearly his life, was that you could not build anything real on a foundation of someone else's fear or someone else's obedience. You could only build it on a choice freely made. And when she made hers, he was going to be ready. He was discharged on a Friday. Not because the doctors insisted on it. They had in fact gently suggested another 24 hours for observation, citing the standard protocol for a patient recovering from a neurological event, which was the fiction that still existed on paper and would remain there for legal reasons Boone had outlined in a 14-point document. But Adrienne had looked at the attending physician, the real one, not Harmon, who had already been quietly thanked and compensated, and said simply, "I've been in this room long enough." And that had been the end of the discussion. He walked out at 10 in the morning. No wheelchair, no assistance. He walked out the way he had walked into every room for 20 years, like a man who had already decided what was going to happen next. Boone was waiting at the curb with the car. They didn't speak for the first 10 minutes of the drive. That was the thing about Boone, 22 years, and he still understood instinctively when silence was the correct response. He drove. Adrienne sat in the back and watched the city move past the window and felt the strangeness of it. He had been gone 5 days. The city looked exactly the same. The traffic patterns were identical. The construction on the overpass at Mercer Street was still exactly as far along as it had been when he went in. The world had not changed at all. He was the only thing that was different. "Talk to me," Adrienne said finally. Boone's eyes in the rearview mirror. "The legal side is clean. Vanessa signed everything yesterday afternoon. Her attorney, the second one, the one she went to after the first resigned, tried to negotiate 2 clauses back, but we countered through Hess and she folded by 4 o'clock. A pause. "She left the city last night, flight to Geneva, one way. And the young man from the hospital cooperated fully. DA's office has his testimony. He won't be charged immunity agreement in exchange for everything he gave us," which was considerable. Boone paused. "The woman Vanessa consulted, the one who discussed the dosage with her, has been identified and is currently having a very uncomfortable conversation with federal investigators who have a long-standing interest in her other activities." "Good," Adrienne said. "Dr. Reyes has retained counsel and gone silent," Boone continued. "Which means he's scared, which means he knows how much he has to lose. He'll surface eventually." "He will," Adrienne agreed. "We'll be ready." Another silence. "And Lucas?" Adrienne asked. Boone took a moment before answering, which was itself an answer. "He came to the office this morning, sat in the lobby for 40 minutes without telling anyone who he was. Finally, the receptionist recognized him and called me." A pause. "He wasn't there to take anything. He left an envelope for you. I have it." "What's in it?" "I didn't open it," Boone said, mildly offended, which almost made Adrienne smile. "Give it to me tonight," Adrienne said. "There's somewhere I need to go first." The car was quiet again. Then Boone said in the careful tone of a man who has been professional his entire career and is making one small exception. "She's working the afternoon shift. East Wing, started at noon." Adrienne looked at the back of his head. "How long have you known where I wanted to go?" "Since the night you asked for her file," Boone said simply. Adrienne turned back to the window. "Take me there." The hospital's private wing had a staff entrance on the east side that most visitors never used. Adrienne knew about it because he had reviewed the building's floor plan before his admission, He reviewed floor plans the way other people reviewed menus, out of habit, and it was through this entrance that he came back now. Not as a patient, just as a man who needed to find someone. He found her in the linen corridor on the third floor loading a cart. She had her back to him. She was humming something low and tuneless, the kind of humming a person does when they're alone and not performing for anyone. And she was folding a towel with the automatic precision of someone who has done this 10,000 times. Nah, he said. She turned around, and the expression on her face, the quick, uncontrolled sequence of surprise to recognition to something warmer and less manageable, was the most honest thing he had seen in a very long time. You left, she said. I was discharged this morning, he said. I came back. She looked at him for a moment, the towel still in her hands. You came back to the hospital. I came back to find you, he said. The linen corridor was not a romantic location. It was narrow and smelled of industrial detergent, and the fluorescent lighting was exactly as flattering as fluorescent lighting ever was, which was not at all. He noted all of this and found that he didn't care even slightly. I told you I was going to ask you something, he said, when the time was right. Her hands tightened slightly on the towel. I remember. I'd like to tell you the whole story first, he said. All of it. The parts I couldn't tell you when you were sitting next to me. The parts that explain who I am and what these past 5 days actually were and why. Why you matter in the middle of all of it, in a way I'm still figuring out how to say correctly. She held his gaze. Her eyes were steady. Okay, she said, tell me. Not here, he said. Will you have dinner with me tonight? A beat. Just one. I get off at 8, she said. I'll be here at 8, he said. She nodded, the small, steady nod he already knew. The nod of someone who had decided and wasn't going to reverse it. He left. His heart was doing something it hadn't done in years, which was moving faster than his logic could keep up with, and he let it. At 7:15 that evening, his phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to Boone. Then something made him pick up. Mr. Whitmore, a woman's voice, older, slightly breathless, like someone who had worked up to making a call and was getting through it on momentum. My name is Grace John. I'm Na's mother. I'm sorry to call you directly. She doesn't know I'm doing this. Adrienne sat very still. How did you get this number, he asked. Na mentioned your name when she called me last night, Grace John said. She didn't say much. She doesn't say much when something matters to her. But she said your name, and I heard something in her voice that I haven't heard in a long time. And a pause, the sound of a woman gathering herself. I looked you up. I know who you are, Mr. Whitmore. I know what you are, and I need to ask you something, woman to man. Ask, he said. My daughter has been carrying this family on her back since she was 19 years old, Grace said, and her voice was steady and fierce in a way that made him understand immediately where Na had learned to be steady. She works 2 hospitals. She sends money every month without being asked and without complaining. She calls me every Sunday and she sounds tired and she tells me she's fine because she doesn't want me to worry. A pause. She has never once in her adult life put herself first, not once. So I need you to tell me, are you going to be something good for her, or are you going to be one more thing she gives herself to that takes more than it gives back? The silence on the line was absolute. Adrienne thought about what to say. He had negotiated with dangerous men. He had faced rooms full of people who wanted things from him. He had just days ago confronted a woman who had tried to have him killed and had done it with complete composure. He had never been asked a question that landed this directly. I don't know yet, he said honestly. I'm not going to tell you I'm a good man, Mrs. John, because I don't know that that's entirely true. I've done things that would make you reconsider this call. He paused. What I can tell you is that your daughter is the first person in longer than I can say who made me want to be worth the kind of person she is. And I understand that wanting it and being it are not the same thing. But I'm going to try, and if I fall short, I'll tell her the truth about it. A long pause. That's a more honest answer than I expected, Grace John said. She taught me that honesty is better than performance, Adrienne said, even when it's inconvenient. Another pause, then quietly. She gets that from her grandmother. I know, he said. She told me. When he arrived at the hospital's east entrance at 8 o'clock, Na was already there. She was out of her work uniform, jeans, a dark jacket, hair down, and she was standing with her hands in her pockets, looking like a person who was trying very hard to appear calm and was 70% succeeding. He got out of the car. She looked at him. He looked at her. They stood for a moment in the way that two people stand when they are both aware that they are at the beginning of something, and neither of them knows exactly how big it is yet. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," he said. "People say a lot of things." She said, not accusatory, just factual. The observation of someone who has learned the difference between words and follow-through. "I know," he said. "I spent 5 days learning which of the people in my life understood that difference." He met her eyes. "You were the only one who showed it without knowing I was watching." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about the 5 days," she said. "Tell me all of it." They went to a small restaurant 4 blocks from the hospital. Not the kind of place Adrian usually went. Not a room that would recognize him and shift around him, just a corner table and ordinary bread and 2 people across from each other. He told her everything. He started with the folder on the desk and Boone's silence and the decision to go under. He told her about the first day Vanessa and the heels and the emails. He told her about Lucas and the midnight confessions and the syringe and the board session at 6 in the morning. He told her about lying in a bed and counting the minutes between visits. He told her about soup left on a table for a man who couldn't eat it. She listened the way she did everything without performance, without interruption, just fully present her hands around her water glass, her eyes on his face. When he finished, the restaurant had gotten quieter around them. They'd been talking for 2 hours. "You were awake when I held your hand," she said. "Yes." "And when I talked about my mother and my grandmother." "Yes." She looked down at the table. "I told a stranger in a coma about my entire life," she said. "You told me," he said. Not a stranger. "I didn't know you. You knew me better than anyone in that room," he said, "because you weren't looking at what I had. You were just looking." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My mother called me an hour ago." He kept his expression neutral. "Did she?" Nah looked up at him, and something in her eyes told him she had already figured it out. "She told me she'd spoken to you," she said. "She said, and I'm quoting directly, 'He's probably more complicated than he's worth, but he's honest, and that's harder to find than people think.'" "High praise," Adrian said. "From my mother it actually is," Na said. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, not yet, but the shape of one. "She also said that if you hurt me, she would find a way to make your life difficult, despite living 3 hours away and being 61 years old." "I believe her," Adrian said. "You should," Na said. "She's completely serious." A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, not charged, just the particular quiet of 2 people who have said the hard things and are sitting in what comes after. "I need to ask you something," he said. "And I meant what I said. You can say no. You can say you need time. You can say this is too much, too quiet," which would be a completely reasonable thing to say given that we technically met while I was pretending to be unconscious. She almost laughed. He heard it catch in her throat. "I'm not asking you to be part of my world," he said carefully, "because my world is not, it's not simple. It's not safe entirely. It's complicated in ways that would require a whole other conversation." He paused. "What I'm asking is simpler than that. I'm asking if I can know you, really know you, and let you know me." He paused again. "The actual me, not the version people manage in fear. Just me." She looked at him across the table. For a long moment she didn't speak, and he let her have the silence because it was hers to use however she needed to. Then she said, "My grandmother used to say that you could tell everything about a person by what they do when no one's watching." "I remember," he said softly. "You were watching," she said, "the whole time. And what I did was bring soup and fix pillows and talk too much and hold the hand of someone I thought couldn't feel it." She paused. "And what you did when no one was watching you was listen, really listen, and change." She held his gaze. "That matters to me." "Is that a yes?" he asked. She looked at him. Something settled in her face, not a performance of certainty, but the real thing arrived at honestly and without rush. "It's a yes," she said. He reached across the table, not dramatically, just an open hand placed between them on the table, the rough-palmed, working hand she had once noticed and read correctly. She looked at it. Then she placed her hand over it, the same way she had in the dark of the hospital room, careful and light and completely real. Adrian, she said, and it was the first time she'd said his name without the weight of uncertainty around it. Just his name, clean and simple. Nah, he said. They sat like that for a moment, and the restaurant moved around them, indifferent and ordinary. And outside the city did what cities do, relentless and loud and completely unbothered by the fact that something quiet and significant was happening at a corner table 4 blocks from a hospital where a man had spent 5 days learning who he was. That night, Adrian sat in his study for the first time since the night he'd opened the folder. The folder was still on the desk. He looked at it, then put it in the drawer and closed the drawer. It existed. The record existed. He didn't need to carry it in front of him anymore. He picked up the envelope Lucas had left, his name on the front in Lucas's handwriting, the handwriting of a man who'd never entirely grown out of printing his letters like a careful child. Inside was a single piece of paper. No letterhead, no legal language, just, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. I'm not asking. I just want you to know that I spent 15 years being resentful of something I could have just asked for instead. I was afraid you'd say no, and I decided being angry was easier than being afraid. I was wrong. If you ever want a brother, a real one, not the transactional version I've been, I'm here, no conditions. I'll prove it through the years, not the words. Adrian read it twice. Then he folded it and placed it in the center drawer of his desk, the drawer where he kept the things that mattered. Boone knocked at 10, came in with a briefing for the next day. The Delacroix contract that Vanessa and Lucas had been so concerned about now returned fully to Adrian's authority, along with 3 other matters that had accumulated during the 5 days of his absence. He listened. He gave Boone his decisions clearly and without ambiguity, the same way he always had. The work was the same. The empire was the same. The structure of his days would look from the outside largely unchanged. But when Boone finished and turned to leave, Adrian said, Boone. Boone stopped. Thank you, Adrian said. For 22 years of it, all of it. Boone turned around. In 22 years, Adrian had never said those words. They both knew that. The silence between the words and Boone's response lasted exactly 4 seconds. And in those 4 seconds, something passed between 2 men who had built something together and had never once acknowledged what it cost. It was worth it, Boone said, quietly, meaning it completely. He left. Adrian sat alone in his study and thought about the 5 days that had just passed. He thought about the clarity of lying still and hearing people speak their truth. He thought about the particular cruelty of Vanessa's ambition and the particular sadness of it that a person could spend 2 years building a life with someone and simultaneously regard them as an acquisition and never feel the gap between those 2 things. He thought about Lucas and the envelope and the 15 years of resentment that had almost curdled into something unforgivable and had, at the last possible moment, turned back towards something human. He thought about Na's grandmother, a woman he had never met and never would meet, who had told her granddaughter that you brought soup to the sick, even if they couldn't eat it, because the soul didn't sleep the way the body did. That woman had been right. His soul had not slept in that hospital bed. It had been more awake than it had been in years. And what it had found, what it had identified in the darkness and silence, in the space between Vanessa's calculating heels and Na's unhurried footsteps, was something he had stopped believing existed in his world. He had found that kindness was not a liability. He had believed for 20 years that softness was a vulnerability, that the capacity for genuine feeling was something to be managed and suppressed because it made you a target. He had been in many ways exactly right in his world. It did make you a target. Vanessa had found the softness under his armor and aimed directly at it, but Na had found the same softness and had not aimed at it. She had simply held it, without weaponizing it, without using it, just held it gently the way you hold something you recognize as fragile and treat accordingly. That was the thing that had changed him. Not the betrayal, not the near death, not the board session or the legal maneuvering or the confrontation with Vanessa. Those things had all happened in the realm where he was already competent, already armored, already practiced. What had changed him was a bowl of soup and an honest hand in the dark. He was going to spend a long time figuring out what to do with that. How to build something real inside a life that had been constructed almost entirely from power and calculation. How to be a man worth the faith of a woman who operated on something purer and more difficult than strategy. How to be a brother maybe to someone who was finally ready to be one. He was going to make mistakes. He knew that. He was not under the illusion that change was clean or that 20 years of building walls dismantled overnight. He was going to get things wrong and have to say so, and saying so was going to require a kind of courage that was different from any courage he had previously exercised. He realized going to have to learn how to be afraid of losing something good instead of afraid of losing something powerful. That was harder. That was genuinely harder. But he picked up his phone and texted Na just one line, the way she communicated when something mattered. Got home safe. Thank you for tonight. Her response came in 40 seconds. Not performing patience, just already at her phone. Thank you for coming back. Good night, Adrian. He put the phone down. And Adrian Whitmore, the most feared man in the city, the man who had faked his own coma to test loyalty and found something he hadn't been testing for, sat in his study in the quiet of a late Friday night, and for the first time in 20 years felt the specific peace of a man who has finally stopped running from himself. He had walked into that hospital room and as a man who controlled everything and trusted no one. He was walking out of this story as something rarer and harder and worth every difficult day it would take to become it. He was walking out as a man who had chosen finally and without conditions to be known. And that singular, terrifying, luminous choice was the beginning of everything that actually mattered.